You don't have to take many, just
Hey.
one or two.
No bums. Out the door with you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at King Street Gallery for this Maggie Hensel-Brown's first exhibition with us. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land King Street Gallery has been situated for the last 43 years, and pay respects to all of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to just start with a quick introduction. So Maggie Hensel-Brown was a Newcastle-based artist. She's been working in lace for the last 10 years, working and studying. She is a highly regarded lecturer in her field and does lecture in the States and throughout Australia. She's just recently finished a large commission at the Newcastle Gallery. And without further ado, I'll let Maggie just take you through a bit of the history and a bit of the technique. So thank you so much, Maggie.
Thanks, Randy.
And welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. This is really exciting. My first show here. So I have been working in lace now for 10 years. This is my 10-year anniversary this week, actually, since I took my first class. It's all coincided with this and with the commission for Newcastle Gallery. It's been a little bit magical. So because it's an unusual medium, what I often like to do in these talks, particularly since we're not at a lace making conference, I don't want to assume knowledge of about lace for anyone, but to give a little bit of a definition of where we kind of sit here in terms of lace as a medium. So the word lace is it's a really big umbrella term. So essentially, it's pretty fabric with holes in it. A better definition is Rosemary Shepherd, who's an amazing lace historian here in Australia. She coined the definition of it's a decorative textile where both the positive and the negative play equal important roles in the piece. And so that whenever I'm taking a design into account, it's always about that. So it's always positive and negative space, and it's about sort of getting that ethereal nature. And making sure that you can, that you can balance those two, your positives and your negatives, and then, slowly add other things. But that at its very most basic, it is a balancing of positive and negative space. So lace making generally, that's it. It's pretty fabric with holes in it. And then if you're getting more specific, which lace people do, you want to break it down further by technique. So what I make is very specifically needle lace. So it's lace that's made only with a needle and thread. It's one of the original, sort of the oldest lace making techniques. So you would recognize lots of others. There's bobbin lace. There's that's the version where you've got sort of a pillow and lots of little wooden bobbins that people often associate with lace making. So that's a different kind. There's tatting that's made with a little shuttle. You sort of push it back and forth through little knots. There's knitted lace, knotted lace, all kinds of other ones. And each one of those has its own really intense, really amazing, specific history. And each one of those techniques will have crossed borders, will have gone from one royal house to another royal house. The stitches will have slightly changed. If you talk to an expert in each particular one, they'll be able to tell you in what year this picot was developed as to add to this, and when they started using these. And that was the thing that kind of really drew me in the first place 10 years ago this week, that I took a class in reticella, which is really the earliest form of needle lace. It's an Italian technique. And I just went, there's this world. It's not, I'm outside of art, I'm outside of university, I'm outside of sort of everything. There's this incredible underground world of these like passionate, amazing, smart older women who know everything there is to know about these incredible techniques, historically, their significance in different areas, and how to make them. And they've been, passed hand to hand to hand, and now the only real way you can do it now is by joining these guilds. It's not, it was this really refreshing kind of amazing world to just go, oh, I'm outside of any kind of ladder climbing. I'm outside of any sort of grasping for cool. I'm just in amongst passionate experts who want to share their expertise. And it blew my mind. And I went, I think this is my calling. There's enough in here that I could study it for life. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down. There's so many techniques that you can learn. And then there's each one of those techniques has an enormously long history. And so you can be both a practitioner and a historian over and over and over again and never get bored. And I was like, well, that's me done. So I quit my job and took my little meager savings and went and studied. I went to England and studied needle lace in Somerset. I traveled around Italy hard there because I didn't know the language, and they were very specific about, we only teach in Italian. But by that time, you can kind of, once you have the basics, you can often look at a piece and kind of dissect it, work out exactly how it was made. And once you have that bit of information, you can kind of track historically where things, sit by different design elements, and you can recreate them and that sort of thing. So it became a lifelong thing for me. And so, yeah, since then I've been, I spent a few years just working my day job and making it, and then I started teaching. I've now taught, I think, more than 600 people, which has been very exciting. I've gone around and lectured in America. I've been collected by lots of, it's institutions, it's museums and galleries often that have like an interest in lace as a specific, there's really not a lot of people left who can do it. So to me, it felt there was a bit of an urgency to start teaching, because, my original teacher, Margaret Stevens, she can't really, a lot of her, she gets a lot of pain in her hands and can't work so much anymore. And I was the youngest in the guild by about 40 years. And I think it's a heavy weight to be carrying. And so there is a bit of an urgency. And so that's me. That's kind of where I sort of sit. So I started 10 years ago, like I said, and I am firmly in needle lace world. So as opposed to bobbin, tatting, all of those others. So needle lace, just to get even more specific. Sorry, I will take you around all the works, but we need a lot of context. Needle lace, the earliest kinds of needle lace was reticella, the type that I mentioned earlier that I took that first class. And so reticella is an Italian technique from the 1500s. And it's a cutwork technique. So you take an existing piece of linen and count the threads within that piece. So it could be linen or cotton or anything with an even warp and weft. Count the threads, and then you painstakingly remove them one by one. And then you weave your own threads back in. Again, I've been such a detail junkie for my whole life, and I couldn't believe the amount of detail. Every stitch is labored over. Every square centimeter takes multiple hours to complete. It was beyond my wildest detail dreams, just learning to do this, first removing and then adding your own incredibly detailed stitches. And so that was the original kind. So you had a piece of linen, you would remove threads, then you would add your own back in. But as sort of fashion changed, and I'm not talking just about fashion in what you wear, but fashion as in just taste. Often lace wouldn't be worn, it would be displayed. It would be like a symbol of your status or power. I think it's interlinked with wearable stuff, but it hasn't always been that. As that kind of, the taste changed, slowly it got to the point where the more negative space you had in your lace, again, we're still in the 1500s here, the more negative space you had in your lace, the higher the value was. And so people would be making an entire piece of linen and then essentially cutting the whole thing away, but putting all of their, stitches back in. So it would make this really rich and sumptuous fabric, but it's mostly air. And so because that was so wasteful of the linen that they were using, it took a lot of energy to create a piece of linen back then. And so essentially it's all ending up on the cutting room floor. So that's when this technique that I'm working with, punto in aria, was created. So that meant rather than using a grid, so using the original sort of grid of your fabric, what punto in aria does is it translates to points in the air. So you create a drawing and then you just make the lace on top of that drawing and then cut it away. So there's no wastage. You're using a backing, you're drawing something, you're using a backing, you're translating that drawing into lace and then pulling it away. I mean, there's, the backing is you can throw that out, but everything else is, it's a much more sort of economical way. And the exciting thing about that also is that once you get rid of the grid, you can introduce so many more interesting designs. So as soon as you kind of throw out that mathematical patterning, you can include, that's when this sort of amazing, all of these works that pop up around the world that tell stories, they're illustrative. So people would put characters and animals and plants and trees and recognizable things, and they would tell stories. So there's lots of incredible historical pieces that tell the story of Judith beheading Holofernes, for example. There's 9 famous lace pieces that have this really gruesome story being told in a piece of lace, just using positive and negative space. And these pieces would be displayed at sort of in houses, in very sort of grand houses, or in churches, or that sort of thing. So enormously long history. We don't know who made them. They're all sort of, all the names are lost to history or were never recorded in the first place. Often some original designers who didn't actually make them, made some woodblocks would be recorded. There's a man called Federico Vinciolo who made impossible to create designs, and then they would be translated by the actual makers. And it's got a long history, a long, very intense, very sexist, very amazing history all across the world. And yeah, but that's when my interest really kicked in. I saw this picture of Judith beheading Holofernes. It's in the Powerhouse collection. And I just went, oh my God, this is amazing. You can tell a story in lace and it doesn't have to be pretty. Like, it's, I think, one of the world's most beautiful mediums, and you're telling a story that's not lovely. Like, it's gory, and it's there's something about that, like, juxtaposition of those two things, a horrifying story and a beautiful medium, that felt like, oof, this is doing something to my head and my creativity, and I can feel it turning into something I want to do. And so that became something for me. So to sort of get to the subject matter here, one of the things that I used to do in art school, and still do to an extent actually, whenever I need to brush up on my drawing, or keep, it's a drawing, I think, is a really intrinsic part of anyone's artistic practice. And I used to have a habit of, if I felt like I hadn't drawn for a long time, I would set an alarm 15 minutes earlier than when I would, than when I ordinarily needed to get up. Started at art school, and then I would just get up and sit down, make a coffee, and draw my bed. So all of the sort of twisted sheets, and get that kind of, draw the drapery. It was just like a practice, and I would just slowly do it. And so it started in my 20s, and I would, I would just do this every morning and wake up with the same blue pencil, and I'd just get a scrap of paper and draw my bed. And then slowly all of the other things. So it started just with the shade of the blankets, and then it was like, oh, my flatmate's cat has come in to sleep in here, or like if I had someone in the bed, or if I had like breakfast or a cup, or like something. It was something to kind of watch, or the book that I was reading before I fell asleep, and you could kind of track the progress. And there was something that felt like it started just as an exercise, and then it turned into this really intimate thing about, like, oh, what's with you in that space in between wake and sleep? What objects are you taking? How is it? What are you rolling over and hitting your face on as you fall asleep? Is it maybe your phone? Is it your laptop? Is it your books? Is it, whatever ends up there? And so I got to really love this imagery of twisted blankets, and then whatever. It felt like it had significance. And I loved it in my life. I loved it in other people's lives. I loved it just as a symbol of, like, something very deeply human. But then also, I think one of the reasons why I've stayed in lace for so long is that it's such a challenge as well. So I was like, okay, so if I want to keep this rolling, keep this sort of interest that I have, just make the same image over and over again, because that's what we all do. Is I get to experiment with trying to make that light and shade, but only positive and negative space. Like I saw this amazing. I got to go to a conference in Amsterdam a few years ago, and there was a little visit we had to this atelier, and there was a little cherub that they had made that implied shading. Sorry,
No, you're good.
That implied shading just with this positive and negative space, opening out the gaps in between the stitches and closing them up, and that made it look three-dimensional. And so that's been something that I've been trying to do for a long time. And yeah, I feel like I'll never quite get tired of it or get it quite right, that feeling of like trying to imply that in my work. And so that's really been what I've been trying with all of these pieces. So I'll start with this one because I'm standing in front of it. This was essentially that. I had a day a year ago where I was just lying in bed. My e-reader ran out of battery. I had started painting my fingernails. I had a scrunchie in the bed, and the sheets were all sort of tangled. I had a cold. I was ready to just, lie around all day. And then I looked up and I went, oh, so, there's a nice sort of combination of things. And I just took a snapshot. And then I spent a full year making it. It just didn't let up. So this has been one entire year in the making. And so this one, I collected all the threads from op shops. So it's all sort of recycled threads and all built up. And there's a little bit of room for play within the making of the piece. So I had these kind of basic lines that I knew were solid, but then the rest you can kind of decide to change to different stitches, always bearing in mind, what's going to come forward, what's going to knock back, and what's going to sort of making sure that you can get a readable image. I think that's something that is quite difficult in lace. And playing with scale as well. So one of the amazing things about needle lace is essentially it's one stitch that you vary in a million different ways. And so everything, if you get a really close-up look, there's this really thick stuff up here, and then the same stitch is being used to create all of these tiny little things in super fine thread. So this is a size 10, that's a size 100 gauge. So there's like a way that you can have a play with the scale of that, which I found very exciting, and not using strictly one thread, and can be very rules-based lace making. So it was quite exciting to experiment. So that is this piece, and then these two were quite a lot earlier. So this one I made it in the first COVID lockdown. And I think this is, earlier, it's when I was first trying to get this kind of drapery and fabric and that sort of thing. I quite like looking back at it and seeing the starts of those things. So this is all made entirely in silk, in the superfine stuff. So this is the 100 gauge, same as the top one up there. And this was just, that sort of general sense of malaise that we all had in that time. I had all of my clothes on the floor and didn't pick them up. I just stitched them instead, and then spent about 6 months stitching them, into something. So it's a month. Each one of these would have taken, between 2 to 6 months to create, and that's not just sort of dropping in and doing a couple of stitches. It's like 12-hour stints. I get very, very intense about it. So often I'll be, sitting not doing anything else for another, 8, 12 hours. So this was about 6 months in the making. So lots of interesting stuff in this one too, in that I was starting to experiment with adding things as I went. So if you look there's some little masks. It was in COVID, and that was when the introduction of the mask came. So I've got a couple of those, and some little birds. They became this kind of freedom symbol for me. So I had lots of these little symbols that would just kind of creep in as I was working. Going along to this one, this was made for an exhibition that was in a desk. So it was just a single desk. You could go and just sit at the desk and open it up and read the books. And this was another one, a lot of just experimentation. Again, this was all silk, and just playing with introducing color and introducing just play with the materials. So this is a stitch that I've slowly invented. I mean, it's based on lots of other ones, but it was a matter of getting different layers and different different colors and trying some beads. And it was at the start of my nail polish jag, obviously. And then trying to introduce more, what about lace and paper? What about, what about these different frames? They're notoriously difficult to display because they are mostly air. So, trying to work out ways to sort of piece it all together. But yeah, that was a really interesting. Sorry?
Is that paper? Is that fabric?
It's paper. Yeah. Yeah. So it's all, it's just good, watercolor paper that I thought I could, just tear out. And I always want to imply, add space behind. I don't like them sitting on anything. You spend all of this time, you spend months and months and months adding negative space, and then people display them sitting directly on something, and it's like, oh, there's so much. Yeah.
That piece there,
yeah.
It's sitting out. So many beautiful shadows.
Yeah, exactly.
Also tell you a bit about them.
That's right. Yeah, I think the shadows are really important. They can get in the way if you make something that's purely white and then you concentrate on shadows. It sort of crosses over. It's a full science experiment every single time. You take one off the backing and then go, okay, what do you need? This one. I luckily I studied sculpture at art school, so I can weld and build and that sort of thing. So that kind of predated the lace making. So building this frame was a tricky one, but it was having to match every single bit to a bit that was thick enough that I could that I could stitch it on without it being too in the way. That's its own long ridiculous process.
Maybe, Maggie, you could tell us a little bit about, you initially said that you make a drawing, and then, but it's not just a drawing, you have to put other layers before you begin the actual stitch work, don't you?
Yeah.
So maybe you could take us through that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So you do the drawing, you take that piece of paper, the exact piece of paper, you sort of make the lines that you're going to use, and you make them strong so you can see them. And then cover it in something like a contact. I often use like window tinting stuff. It's good. It's quite pliable. It's a good tip if you need one. And like something, but there is like official lace maker stuff too. But it's very hard to find because you can only go to the shop on the first Sunday of every second month, and it's a whole thing. But so you have the original piece of paper, something to cover it so that it doesn't tear too much. And then you have 3 to 4 layers of fabric underneath. And so that gives you something substantial to hold on to. And it also means that you've got something that you can stitch, you can anchor your threads in. So then you sort of lay these threads all the way around each one of those lines, and you anchor them into the backing, in through all of the paper, the plastic, the whatever's there, the layers of fabric. And then that creates like a scaffolding that you're making all of your stitches in. And so then that's the months and months and months of stitching. And then you go back over it again. And then each one of those lines, so all of these lines, that's where it's called a coordinate, what the lines that you make. So they are all hidden inside here. And then you go back over and add padded threads and stitch back over. So that gives it this kind of 3-dimensional, it brings those lines out. So it's a 3-step process basically, and each one of those 3 steps takes inordinate amounts of time.
But when you've done the paper and the cloth, do you then have like a frame to keep it taut?
No, I either put it over my knee or a pillow, or if it's these little ones were so tiny I could just fold them over my finger. Or sometimes like a piece of cork, you can just pin it in. Right. But it's fairly tight as it is. It's not, because it's got so many layers. It's got 4 layers of fabric and paper and contact. It's not really going to warp or stretch. It's quite rigid. Whereas with something like bobbin lace, there's a lot of movement because it also has that stuff, but you have to pin everything down so specifically, and then that's part of it when you have the frame afterwards, is that you have to, take it off, wash it, block it, and then see where it falls, because some of your stitches might have compressed a little bit and some might not. So this is quite stretched as well. But yeah, you can have all kinds of, like, this was so big, I had it on this giant, it was a full king size sheet that I had folded into 4, and then I just put it over my knee, kind of strapped it down.
No magnifying glass.
No, sometimes for the really intense ones, I just use those chemist ones. I do have a magnifying glass, but it makes me seasick. It's really, everything moves around so much. But the super intense, because all of this, it's hard to tell from far away, but so nothing was solid. So everything, all of this was built up stitch by stitch.
It's not applique, which a lot of people think that it's just a little bit, that you could go to an arts and crafts store and buy an applique and then just put it on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's not cut out of a thing and then embroidered on top of it. It's all been, created. And if you look quite closely, you can see that it couldn't have been. I try, because it's so based in drawing, and because I'm shading and I'm doing all of these things, I try and let my stitches mimic the way that your pencil would move. So if you were sort of drawing along in here, I want the rows to go in that direction. John noticed that earlier, and I felt very thrilled that it is like cross-hatching. It's trying to imply shape and form by the direction of your stitches.
But then you also talked about the drawing element of it. So you might spend days, weeks, months finalizing what your drawing is, but you also mentioned that along the way, you might change your mind, or you might want to add something.
Yeah.
But you've already attached and begun the work.
Yeah.
So do you actually draw the next element in, or you just stitch the next element, or lace the next element in?
Yeah, I'll stitch it in. I'll scratch it into the paper with the tip of a pin.
Right.
And use that as a starter. And that's the thing, you don't tell lace people that. They're much more, I hate doing the coordinate. I hate it. It's my least favorite part. And so I do a little bit of it and then do some ground stitches and then come back and do a little bit more coordinate, which that's, if I was very traditional about it, you would have it all set out, you would do the entire coordinate, and then you would do everything else. But having this kind of back and forth thing of which step you're doing at which time means that you have a little bit more opportunity to say, add something, add a scrunchie up here, or add this little design, or that kind of, when I was adding the masks and the birds and things like that, that was a lot of that I was just kind of making up. So this design that I use quite a lot, I don't plan. That all comes out just as I work. So there's lots of freedom in that. I think this sketch only had the pillow and the blanket and the book, and then the rest. And the scrunchie, but I think I shifted it slightly. But yeah, there's a little bit of room for movement, but don't tell lace people that.
And what about when you're making something and you add something, and then after you've added it in, you decide it doesn't work?
Oh, cut it off. I love it.
You just cut it out
and
just get...
Yeah.
But that must be painstaking as well, because the stitches are small and the threads are different weights or volume.
Well, the great thing about the technique with the backing, with having 4 pieces of fabric underneath, is that, so you have all of your lace threads, and all of your lace threads are sitting on top of your piece. So that's the stuff that it's all made out of, your coordinate and everything. And then you have couching threads, which are finer, just cotton threads made out of something that doesn't really matter. And they're the only things that go through. So basically what happens is, when you remove it, as long as you only cut from the back or in between the layers of fabric, you know that you're never going to cut something that's actually a part of the piece. And so that's my one very, very strict rule, is that if you've got lace thread on the needle, it never goes through the backing, because otherwise you could forget it and it could all disappear. So there's a little bit of safety in that. But it is very painstaking, particularly if it's just a section that you're trying to take out, because you can't get in between the layers of fabric at that point. But there's something lovely about the backs get really interesting, because the back of the backing fabric, because it's just full of threads going everywhere. It's like the exact opposite of the intensity of the detail on the front, because it's messy and there's threads hanging off it and there's everything everywhere. So as long as you're attacking that bit, you're fairly safe.
So can I just ask, did you mention that once you've taken that
Mm-hmm.
You wash it. Did you say?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and do you get with threads that the colour runs?
I did once.
Or you get bits that shrink?
Yep. Yeah, all of that.
Why wash it? Why not just, presumably, it's pretty pristine?
No, not at all, because it's been with me for a year and it comes everywhere I go, and I'm touching it with my hands over and over, so it's got so much just humanness on it.
Right.
And you know, I don't only work from a studio. I'll often like take it to a friend's house if I'm in the middle of it, or I'll on the train I'll work. Like it's your constant companion for a year. So there's no way you can keep it pristine. It's not possible. I always wash my hands. I try not to wear fibrous fabrics when I work, because if you get a fiber sort of trapped in, particularly the really fine stuff, if you get a fiber trapped in, it's not going anywhere. It's just going to look like a stain. So I sometimes wear a leather jacket backwards so that it's like an apron. But yeah, it needs to. I had a disaster once with I'd made a piece for the Textile Triennial a few years ago, and there was a red. I'd made a little matchbox, redheads matchbox, and it was bright red. And I washed it, and I was working right up to the deadline. It was like, 2 days before I had to stretch it onto the frame to take it to the thing, and the red ran into all the white around it. It was horrific. But
could you clean it, or did you have to get rid of it?
I had to get rid of it and do all of the. It was okay. It didn't go. It sort of bypassed some. It only went into the silk and it didn't dye the cotton. And so by the time it had gotten to the silk, there was slightly less. So it was sort of a piece, small-ish piece that I had, but it did set me back like quite a long time. It was a disaster. But I managed. Just didn't sleep that week.
And how about the addition of the beading, of the glass beading? Is that part of the sort of the plan, or does that formulate along the way? Is it
that? I mean, it formulates along the way. I always, these days, particularly these ones, I knew would have beads. I'm on a bit of a bead thing at the moment, and I love them. I love adding that little extra sort of sparkle. And I'd been working on this method of making it entirely out of beads, so you can kind of I had my little low battery symbol, and I mimicked that as I was creating the beads. So you can put it on a grid essentially, and make a whole little beaded thing, or using it as an embellishment. I like it as something to kind of imply a bit of shine, or like a bit of, maybe the nail polish hasn't dried yet, and so it's got that little bit of sparkle. And then there's others. Sometimes I'll embellish the entire thing in beads as well. That same piece that I had for the Textile Triennial, I'd put a bead at every junction in the whole center. So sometimes they require a lot, and sometimes they don't. And I think it's just another little kind of seeing what the piece needs, I guess. Once you take it off the backing, and they've got a little voice to tell you what they need.
You did earlier also mention that sometimes along the way when you're doing the work, you invent a stitch that might be something never seen before. Well, you say invented. So when you invent that stitch, do you maintain, or do you write down how that stitch is done, and then does that get introduced if you teach or if you go to a meeting? Do you name that stitch?
I've never named one.
You have.
That'd be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, you haven't. So do people put claim on what they invent?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe they do. I don't. I like the idea that it just sort of goes out there. I think that it's too small of a world to be standoffish. Like we need people to make it. There's not enough of us. And so my idea is, like, I've tried to teach as many people as possible. I do paid workshops, but I also, last year I did or the year before, I did a community project that completely ballooned out of what I thought. I wanted 200 people to be involved, but I ended up with over 400, and it was this massive, just things coming to me from all around the world. I had every continent just sending all of this stuff for me to join together, and I'd made a little pattern for a little leaf and then had joined them. And that was actually really interesting because I could spot who my students were, like a real, because I hadn't taught this stitch, but then people would send me leaves from, you know, everywhere in the world, and they'd be using my stitch, you know, and it was like I could go through the final thing and go, you're one of mine, you're one of mine, you're one of mine, you're one of mine.
And that was on view. That was on view at the Australian.
It was, yes.
Design. It was beautiful. I remember it when you had the exhibition there. It was a very beautiful one.
Yeah, thank you.
The Australian Design Centre down the road, which has recently had a serious funding cut.
They did, yeah.
Along with all the other regional galleries.
Yeah, it's a real blow.
Yeah. And Maggie, what do you see as the future for what you're teaching and what you're doing? Is there a resurgence? Is there a lot of interest? Do you get a lot of requests for? Yeah. Because there is a little bit of a retro desire for particularly younger people to learn more of the handmade. Yes. As opposed to the ready-made.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed an enormous upswing in interest. And I think, you know, I feel like my role in particular, the Guild is a wonderful thing. Sometimes it's people who are so passionate about the technique and the history, but don't necessarily have like a design background, and so it can be difficult to see the beauty in it. And often, if someone's interested in learning lace, they'll get into the Guild, but there are so many rules that they feel scared and they sort of back off. So I think where I'm sort of am in lace world is like, you know, I'm a really big deal in lace world. You know, it's become quite a thing, and so I think there aren't a huge amount of people who are able to incorporate design and brush away some of the rules so that it's not so intimidating. I think it can be really, I mean, I was intimidated. No one wanted to speak to me for 4 years. I joined the Guild, and it was like they'd say, oh, good, we need new young people, and then they would just close the spot at the table and not, I would just have my cup of tea and try and find something to do, and you know, it was just, it can be really awkward, and because it is so, you know, sort of shunted away from a lot of other textile practices and arts and everything. Yeah, I think there's a desire for it, because I've noticed that desire, because as soon as the ball started rolling for me, I got all of this interest from so many sections of society, lots of young people, lots of, you know, everyone.
Men and women?
Men and women, predominantly women. And sucks to be them. I'm just like, you know, you can join in if you want. I don't. But yeah, there's definitely I think it's across the board. It's all over. I think you're right. There is. I think there's a real interest in revivalist crafts and things that, you know, AI can't spend 6 months working on a single piece of lace, and you know, it can make lots of amazing things, but it can't make this. And
but do you also think, Maggie, that I've been talking a bit about this to some of people coming to the gallery, that division that used to exist between craft and art, where craft was the lower of the two forms, but the truth is you can't make art if you're not good at your craft. Exactly. So it's a funny sort of, that's right. Exactly.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, nana stuff.
And craft was, which is about time, isn't it?
We're now in the arts and we're bringing what we know.
That's right.
So very important and kind of and relatively new. So do you think that divide, which is one I thought never really should have existed, but that divide is closing now, so that because you see a lot of the commercial galleries now who may have only previously shown painting, printmaking, drawing, sculpture, maybe installation, but they wouldn't show necessarily ceramics, textiles, glass. Now there are many galleries who incorporate all that into what they show on a regular basis. Not only in commercial, but also in the public institutions. I mean, it's about time, of course, but
definitely, yeah. I mean, I felt that I stepped away from art in order to do this. It felt very much like it was. I had a toe in the world, but it was, and that, you know, that's only been in the last 10 years, really. So it's not. I would say the gap hasn't fully closed. No, but it's definitely a lot smaller than it was, and I think it always is that balance of, you also don't. I mean, and I maybe I'm a snob about this, but I specifically didn't exhibit it for 7 years because I had a little bit, or I didn't sell any for 7 years. I didn't, I wanted to be the best at it as I could, and I didn't want to put the pressure on it to pay my bills. And so I worked at my day job and I got as good at it as I possibly could. And I didn't want that sort of pressure, and I didn't want to cut corners. I wanted to make sure that I could sort of straddle, you know, I am good at this, I'm good at the technique, and I'm good at the design, and what I make is exactly what I want it to be, and I'm proud of it. But that took years. You know, if I had exhibited, I made some really beautiful things when I first started, but I don't want them to be on a gallery wall. They were my experiments. You know, they were things that I was testing and I was playing around with, and I was mastering the craft. And I don't think I'll ever master it. I don't think you can, but I think that there's a sweet spot in the middle where you're making something, you know, you can have some of the most incredible technicians of a craft exhibit something that looks just not that good. Or you can have someone who is an amazing artist and they learn one technique once and then immediately put it on the gallery wall and it just hasn't been made that well. And so it's like, I think somewhere in the middle, you find something. And I think it's my sort of endless quest to stay in the middle there, you know.
A good quest.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Maggie?
Are you doing the next workshop?
Next weekend in Newcastle, I'm doing one in person, and the rest I usually teach online.
Oh.
Yeah, but yeah, I can keep you posted. Sign up for my mailing list. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Maggie so much.
Thanks, Amy.
Sorry for all my questions, but thank you so much,
Thanks.
Maggie.
Cheers. Thank you.